So, Len, welcome to the show.
Thanks, mate.
Hey, so I'm really fascinated. We were chatting just before we got started here, and you run a company called that deals with. Let's just get into it. You deal with DNA, cannabinoids, your endocannabinoid system, all this sort of stuff. There's a lot of talk in the industry. There's a lot of projections in the industry, but you've really taken this to the next level by bringing real genetic related information personalized to the person, and how to leverage the endocannabinoid system.
Right.
Let's just get your backstory. How did this all start?
Okay. So as a kid, I grew up in Philly, and I was the kind of kid that you sort of sit in class and I begin to daydream and drift off. So I was diagnosed with ADD, and they put me on all kinds of prescription medication, and all of it sucked. Some of it worked, but it made me feel like shit. So I was hanging out with some older kids one day, and they're like, "Hey, do you want to smoke a cigarette?" I'm like, "I'm going to be the cool kid. I'm going to smoke a cigarette with these older kids." And so they passed me a cigarette, and I take a drag and inhale it, start coughing. I'm like, "That's not a cigarette. That doesn't taste like a cigarette." So they stuffed it with weed. And I went back to class, and my ADD has like all these windows that are open in my head. So I sort of narrowed those windows down, and I could focus. And it sort of became my go-to medicine. And doing that, I got off all other meds and I just went to cannabis. So I didn't know it was medicine for anybody, but it made me feel a certain way. And my parents really didn't like that, so they catch me and get me out of being in trouble. And eventually they ended up kicking me out, actually calling the cops on me and having me trying to get me arrested and kicking me out. The irony of that is they both take formulations that I manufacture, made for them now for their aches and pains. So it came full circle. But so in doing that, when I was on my own, I became an activist. I was the president of the Cannabis Action Network, and I fought for legalization. I held a rally at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, where the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are, all on hemp paper, by the way.
Yes, indeed. So the sails of the Mayflower, the ropes of the Mayflower, and the Constitution was all based on hemp paper.
Yep. So in that, I was an activist, and then I moved to Los Angeles about 12 years ago, and I got into the dispensary space. So I was an owner and operator of 5 dispensaries. And then one of the things I kept seeing over and over is 2 people with the same symptomatic conditions will come in, get the same exact cultivar, what we would refer to as strain, and have a completely different experience. And so ADD kicked in, and I could hyper-focus. I became obsessed. And I'm like, I need to figure this out. So I thought it was the plant itself, because we have all these different names of different strains and plants. So Blue Dream and Green Crack and ridiculous names like that. Right. So, and then they're inconsistent.
Texada Time Warp is one of my favorites. I've got a friend that lives on Texada Island in
That's
British
a great
Shores.
one. My favorite is Alaskan Thunderfuck. Have you ever heard of that one?
No, I haven't heard that one.
That's the best one. I'm like, all right, it sounds great. So I got into, and I found a video by a guy named Kevin McKernan, who was one of the first people to genetically sequence cannabis. And I started contacting him, and long story short, I started working with them. My job was to travel around the US and Canada and get plant material, bring it to my lab, extract the DNA, purify it, and send it to Boston to a sequencer. So we started the first library called Cannapedia of different cultivars or strains. And you could see an example would be like Blue Dream, since I mentioned. So I would get 5 different Blue Dreams, or what's called Blue Dream, bring in, I could see genetically 2 of them align. So they're pretty much Blue Dream. 2 other ones are close, they're cousins, there's a relationship, but they're not Blue Dream. And the 5th one is not even close. It's called Blue Dream and completely something different. And so we started looking to see, all right, it must be names. But then we had a conference of doctors that were treating kids with epilepsy at Harvard Medical School using CBD. And a lot of them would come back saying, well, we're going from 100 seizures to 0. It's working fantastically. But some of them were saying the seizures are coming back, or it's not working. There's some outliers. So they had a pharmacogenomics company. We sequenced these kids' DNA, and we saw they had genetic markers in common. It was for a form of epilepsy called Dravet syndrome, and published an article on that. And it was peer-reviewed, and we think GW Pharmaceutical probably focused on that to get their Epidiolex product past the FDA. So that was my light bulb moment. I said, well, if there's one biomarker, there's probably more. And they shut down the human side. So I got a chance to take some science people with me and formed Endocanna Health in 2017. So our first 6-7 months, all we did was research. We looked at every single SNP, which is a single nucleotide polymorphism gene, let's say, that has a direct or indirect association with your endocannabinoid system. Once we did that, we had peer-reviewed studies for each one of them. And then we went to Illumina, who's a company that makes sequencing equipment, and we asked them to make a chip for us. So we made a custom chip, and then we created our kit, and that's how we kind of launched. So it's pretty much a really short,
must be the most compressed long story that I've ever heard. Pretty impressive.
It's 25 years, like 2 minutes.
I could learn from that. It takes me 25 years to say 2 minutes of my life, so I'd like to reverse that. You talked about activism and you talked about your early years because, I was in Vancouver, Canada when the big extraction of Mark Emery. So Mark Emery was kind of like one of the icons of legalizing cannabis in Canada, and had the highly publicized case where he was extradited from Canada to the United States. But there was some sort of plea deal that happened because of all the publicity. He ended up he did his time, but then also became kind of that's the point where everything changed. What do you think? For you, it took, coming in that environment where you're getting so much pressure from your family members, let's say, because, it was just be reefer madness and this is bad and people fail and all that sort of stuff. And unfortunately, what happens is you have a broad range of experiences and people will take the negative and then just project that on the whole point. Right. Or they'll take the positive and project that on the point. What you're doing here is completely different. You're into customizing and sequencing, particularly with that person's individuality. What point for you did it come? Did it go from being kicked out of your house to like this is where I'm going to be an advocacy from that? And what transpired to make that happen?
I think it takes a passion. Like my understanding that it was wrong. Like all that your brain is on drugs and this your brain on drugs and all that other was fed to us. I think I had an experience. I saw a lot of other people have an experience. I'll tell you my aha moment where everything kind of flipped. So my parents kicked me out. I'm defined. I was always kind of a defiant kid. And
what do you mean by that, defined?
I didn't do I did all right in school, but if I don't like authority, if a teacher tells me what to do, I get kicked out of school, I got in a fight with my teacher, that kind of stuff. So I'm defined in that way.
I can relate to that.
So
that's how you start your own business, right?
Exactly.
It's more of a disagreeable person, right?
I don't do well with authority. So I know I don't do well with authority. I got to do my own thing at some point. So when I held my rally in Pennsylvania, as I was saying, my keynote speaker was this woman named Elvie Musica. And she was one of the first people to get federally prescribed cannabis under a program that NIDA supported, that they grew this cannabis in Mississippi, and they provided them this tin with pre-rolled joints with a big USDA label. And I was like, wait a second, Schedule 1, it's illegal. My friends are getting arrested for this, but you're growing it and you're giving it to people. Made no logical sense.
When was this? What year?
This is 1992.
Wow, that's a long time ago.
That's a long time ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah, so she opened up her tent, and this is federal property with federal rangers everywhere, and she lit up a joint, and they didn't do anything. I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. So everybody crashed in my house afterwards, all the people who were doing the conference. So all of a sudden, I was dating this girl. She was an artist. She made the sculpture in my house. All of a sudden, we got woken up to a big crash. Something broke, and so Ellie woke up, and she walked into the sculpture and broke it into pieces. I was like, oh man, but she has glaucoma, degenerative glaucoma, so she's legally blind. And the moment that I saw this, she got a joint and she lit up and she started to see. She still wore the thick glasses so she could see again. So I'm like, wait a second, this is real. I see it in real time. It's not just for me. It happened right in front of my eyes. So I knew this was a therapeutic substance. And that's kind of what triggered everything for me to kind of pursue my passion.
Wow, that's such an interesting point. And what were some of the hiccups or the parts that became challenging along the way? Because you're dealing, with different state laws, you're dealing with federal laws, you're dealing with international laws. There's being advocacy, and then you're targeted by watch groups or three-letter organizations. Do you have any run-ins with the law or anything like that during that journey?
Yeah, many run-ins with the law. I have friends of mine who went to prison for cannabis. And we got shut down. Like I mentioned, I have 5 dispensaries. So I get a call from my manager of one of my shops. She's like, "The feds are here. What do I do?" I'm like, "Whatever they tell you." And
yeah. They have guns.
Yes, anything they tell you to do, just do that.
The government has a license on violence.
Exactly.
A lot of people forget that.
So then they closed us down one by one. The last shop was in Santa Ana, and the guy from the department, that's the only one I went to. The guy from DOJ comes up. He's like, "Let's go for a walk." We walk, and he's like, "I have no problem with dope. My mom takes it for cancer." He goes, 14 days, cease and desist, stop operating. We're not going to prosecute. So they sort of, forced us to shut down. So I called my buddies at the Marijuana Policy Project, it's a lobbying group in DC, and I'm like, "What's going on? What's up?" He's like, "Quid pro quo." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, Obama," and this is the funniest, ironic thing, because Obama, out of all the presidents that you think about it, he's the one that actually inhaled. Mm-hmm. And you think about him, and he decided he needed to get, by the way, this is just, second information. I don't know any facts to support this. So the information is that he had to have an education bill that he wanted passed. And Big Pharma was really pushing synthetic cannabinoids, THC, like Marinol. And they basically said, shut down some prominent shops and we'll support your bill. And it started in San Diego, and they started shutting down shops, and we were one of the few that got shut down, and that was it. So they made a statement. So
that's very interesting, because they had a similar type thing happened in Canada, in Vancouver, which I'm from. There was, I think at one point, 165 dispensaries in the city of Vancouver operating. And then as things became more federally regulated and the bills came in, and then the synthetics and the governments and Big Pharma came in, all of a sudden, all of these dispensaries started getting busted in by the cops, one after one after one. So really what you're seeing is a situation where it appears that Big Pharma is leveraging government policy and using the police as their muscle on the street in order to basically corner the market. Would you say that appears to be accurate?
I would say that appears to be accurate. And I would say that everything shifted. If you really think about it, when Epidiolex got approved by the FDA, now Big Pharma started seeing, okay, we don't have to go this route. There is a lane for us that opened up. Now we can take individual cannabinoids and we can file IP the same way we do pharmaceuticals, and we can create pharmaceutical grade products that we can do on our own. And now you're seeing the whole country starting to open up a little bit. So could it be an ironic timing of this, or is there some nefarious reasons behind this?
I want to get into the endocannabinoid system, because this is, I think, something that is a very exciting field of research, which is expanding. There's a lot of money going into it. There's a lot of people who are finding relief. But can you explain, in your experience, what the endocannabinoid system is for our listeners, and why it's so important to understand your unique system, I guess, or differentiation, which is associated with your genetics?
Yeah. So the endocannabinoid system was discovered in 1992. So people who went to medical school prior to that didn't even know that this existed. And the real interesting thing is, it's a primary regulatory system. So think about the endocannabinoid system as sort of the puppet master. What it does, it gets signals from all the other systems, the endocrine system, all the other systems, and modulates by sending out chemicals and messages into those systems, which chemicals to release, because the overall goal of the system is to get our body into homeostasis, which is really balance. And it does that through 2 endogenous endocannabinoids that it produces itself. The first one is called anandamide, which you would say is the word anand in Sanskrit means bliss. Yes. So this is your bliss hormone. And the other one is 2-AG. And so THC, the phytocannabinoid from the plant, it mimics the way anandamide works in our bodies. And it has a receptor called the CB1 receptor, which is mostly located in your brain, your central nervous system. And then you have a CB2 receptor, which is mostly in your immune and digestive system. And that one stimulated these enzymes that CBD actually stimulates, and that mimics 2-AG. So you have phytocannabinoids from the plant that mimic the way our endogenous endocannabinoids. So we actually have kind of cannabis inside of us. And you get those phytocannabinoids to work and bind to those receptors that we already have in our bodies. And the overall goal is to have that balance and homeostasis.
So that's, again, very succinct. So how does a person determine which cannabinoids are right for them, going back to the strain component where now they're sequencing this, and how does those two things kind of fit together? The overarching system, but then we've got the individuality.
Yeah, so the system itself is there, and it can regulate itself normally with its own endogenous endocannabinoids. However, we do have some imbalances in our own endocannabinoid system, so we have deficiencies, and some of those deficiencies are because of prohibition. If you think about it, years and years ago, cannabis was part of our overall diets. Even though we may have not consumed it, animals would eat hemp or cannabis, and it would be in our food supply, in our
It's
water.
plowed into the soil to reconstitute the
Exactly.
microbes in the soil. You always grew an area of hemp in the farm, and then you plowed it, you turned it back in, and it's great for the soil.
It's great for the soil. Just the plant. I mean, you probably know Chernobyl planted a whole bunch of hemp to be able to absorb all the nuclear waste in the ground. So it's an amazing plant with so many different things.
They have like nuclear joints.
There's a nuclear joint, man. You can smoke it first. Let me know how you like it.
It's a radioactive high.
Exactly. So the thing that I started seeing is these adverse effects. So cannabis is a drug, just like sugar is a drug, caffeine is a drug, it's a drug.
Right.
So you have to be really careful, and everybody has their own experience with it. And one of the things I started finding, I'm not the person that has adverse effects from cannabis, but I did one time go to this event and I tried something that was called Clear, which is like a 99% THC extract. And when I tried that, I just, oh my God, like my heart started pounding more than normal and all this stuff. And I started feeling panicked, anxiety came up. And I'm like, oh, well, that's what people go through with certain cannabis.
Right. It's not something that you experienced before, but now you had an insight into what that feels for people. It's not
exactly. So different people experience different adverse effects from different types of cannabis. So our goal when we started was to try to give something like a blueprint for somebody, so we can use our product as our test as a GPS. So this will show you this road over here has a traffic jam on it, is construction, so avoid this. This road over here is a much better road to take. Doesn't guarantee there's not going to be a pothole along the way, but one of the challenges that I started seeing from people is, it takes 4 to 8 different products until people find what works for them. During that process, they can have some adverse experiences and say, I'm not going back to cannabis anymore. And I'll give plenty of examples of that if you would like. And then until they find what works for them. And then when they find what works for them, if it's flower itself, you have something called genetic drift. So you never have consistency in flower. You can get your green crack from one place and your green crack from another place. It'll be 2 different things. So our goal was always to try to focus on avoid an adverse event so you can have an optimal experience with your cannabis use.
Can you illustrate maybe the difference between some of the endocannabinoid stuff? So there's THC and then there's CBD. And I noticed for myself, I do really well on CBD for whatever reason. I like that. THC kind of, I get a little goofed out of it, and I have a harder time focusing, and I can't stop eating.
That will do it, yeah.
So can you explain the differences of those particular components so our listeners can understand?
Yeah, so the plant's very complex. It has somewhere around 500 different components in it that we've identified. We don't know what a lot of them are, so we identified somewhere around 114 different components that we already actually have names for, and we understand the effects. So you have the cannabinoids themselves, which you mentioned, THC and CBD, and THCV and CBDV and CBG and CBN and all these other things. So I'm going to try to explain it, and then you have terpenes too, which I'll explain.
Please go through the whole list so that people can get a proper understanding of what each one of those things are.
And also indica and sativa, which are no longer exist too. So I'll give you the whole rundown.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
So the plant itself has its own genetics, which are cannabinoids. And these cannabinoids are expressed in what's called the trichomes of the actual flowers. And the flower grows, it gets a certain amount of maturity, and it starts expressing these cannabinoids. In the plant, they work synergistically together to create an effect. They all start at the main cannabinoid, the grandfather cannabinoid or mother cannabinoid is CBG. Every single cannabinoid has an acid molecule. If I'm getting too sciencey.
No, I love this stuff.
Right.
So we're going right. Let's go right for it.
So the acid molecule is in the raw plant. So the raw plant has, all these different cannabinoids, like you mentioned, THCA, CBDA, all these other components in the plant. And I'll explain what THC and CBD does. So when you heat the plant, so when you cut it and dry it, and under stress, it also expresses its terpenes, which I'll explain what that is as well. And you dried it, you cured it, now you have the plant. When you heat the plant, it drops the acid molecule and converts it to its THC delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is THC, and CBD, which is cannabidiol, and all the other cannabinoids. Now, when we consume this, so most of the cannabinoids are psychoactive, but they're not intoxicating. Only THC, and now we have delta 8, which is, if you want to talk about that too. But THC is an intoxicating cannabinoid. And what it does, as I mentioned, it binds to the CB1 receptor, and it mimics the way anandamide works within our bodies.
So that's that kind of blissful, heart-based, relaxed, open feeling.
Exactly.
Right, and that can be pretty connecting.
Yeah, and then why sometimes what happens with THC, and it depends how much of it that you take, THC is a vasodilator. So what it does, it dilates your blood vessels, your heart starts pumping faster, and some people are predisposed to anxiety and stress. So if you know normally that your heart's going to beat faster, and it's just part of the way of consuming THC, you're fine with that. Some people, it triggers the genetic expression to have an anxiety and stress. So some people don't like high amounts of THC. What CBD does, it works very similar to 2-AG, which is the other endogenous endocannabinoid. And it's an amazing anti-inflammatory. So it stimulates these enzymes that are part of your immune and digestive system, and it helps to be able to regulate those systems. So a lot of people, and also it's a adverse agonist of THC. So if people are consuming too much THC, we think there are studies that showed that consuming CBD will help to release the binding of the receptor, and it won't make you as euphoric, as high.
Right, that makes sense to me because I've noticed CBD and THC in the right combination seem to be better for people. And now you go to the places and it's 4-to-1 and 8-to-1 and 8-to-11.
Exactly.
Now we're seeing these ratios and people are dialing in the ratios, which is like maybe stage one before we get to kind of where you're talking.
Yeah.
A couple things. I'm a big fan of the Pat McAfee show, and he talks about he left the NFL because for him, ADD guy, cannabinoids was something that allowed him to perform. He was one of the best kickers in the entire league. Then he got into the substance issues with the league, and he checked out of it. And then, he was saying, I believe it was him, was talking about how there is a big number of athletes who are using cannabinoids and THC to recover from, or to kind of wind themselves down from these things, or to manage game time anxiety. And unfortunately, a lot of them get put into this kind of like substance abuse thing, when in actuality, they could use a speed-based drug given to them for brain focus or whatever, prescribed, but the guy smokes a doob and he gets busted from the league. So any comments about what you've noticed on that?
I mean, I work with a lot of athletes, and I've had a lot of them as customers of Endocannabinoid Health, and some of them were on my podcast, some good friends of mine. You have guys like Ricky Williams.
Right, who made a big stand about it.
Left the league because of it. And he said, and then my good friend Evan Britton, who's...
just had him on the...
I know, he was on mine. He's a really good friend. We just hiked the other day together. And he used to tell me stories like when they get off the bus, the trainer gives them pills. They give him a handful of pills. And he used to be like, and put them in their pocket and consume cannabis. As long as you're not a rookie, and if you're an experienced player, you know when testing happens. So a lot of them in locker rooms consume and smoke, and they navigate through policy. Ricky said that the only time he got is when he switched teams, because the schedule for testing was changed. And I think if you really talk to him, if you ever have him on, he'll tell you he probably did this on purpose to make a statement, make a stance, because he's like, I'm not taking opioids, I'm not taking benzos, I'm not taking anything. I like the natural plant. So absolutely, it works for some people. And I'll tell you, so my good friend Danny Hester, who's he was a Mr. Olympia.
Yeah, he's pictures up over at Gold's Gym. Fantastic bodybuilding champion.
Amazing. In his, I don't want to give away his age, he can say it. In his,
He's incredible shape for his age.
in his
Absolutely incredible.
mid-40s, he won Mr. Olympia natural physique.
Yes.
So Danny, when he was training, he came to me and he's like, Len, we do legs. I'm training twice a day. I do legs. And he's like, is there anything that cannabis can help with to recover so I can do legs? Because that's the worst.
So
And I'm like, let me tinker. So I came up with a formulation and I called it recovery and I gave it to him. And he's like, and he won Mr. Olympia that year. I'm not taking credit for this, but
any of us bodybuilders that been to the gym, of course, in the bodybuilding industry, managing the pain of extreme training is the same thing for NFL and stuff like that. And so many people get addicted to products like Nubane and opioids and these type of things, which have horrific withdrawal issues, side effects, and stuff like that. And so managing pain is something that every athlete needs to do, especially if you're training legs routinely. I mean, I had a year where I couldn't walk. If I stepped off a curb, I would just collapse because I was in such excruciating pain.
it's the worst, right?
Yeah, so I can relate to that. So that's very cool that you came up with the recovery program.
Yeah, and some of those athletes, they take cannabis to help pre-workout too. So it all depends what it is. And when you understand your endocannabinoid system, you understand your genetic predispositions, now you can create formulations that'll be like your daytime and then your nighttime.
Right.
So you can consume different things throughout the day depending on what it is that you need based on the outcome that you want to achieve.
And I've noticed on a lot of these cannabinoids that seem to be great delivery agents for other nutrients. Like, so I notice a lot of people will, for example, with our nootropics, they find that if they do a CBD or a THC CBD combination, they get an amplified effect or a sustainable effect, or it just seems optimized. Is that part of because of the mechanisms of how that works? Because I kind of jumped around. We haven't gone through all the list. But
I remember. I bookmarked it. Even my ADD popped up, but
I want to come back to that. But it was such an interesting topic. So.
Well, I'll tie my answer into talking about indicas and sativas and how the plant works. So we have these things, indica and sativa. So indica is supposed to be down, a sedative, and sativa is supposed to be up, right, uplifting. We don't have that anymore. So indicas and sativa were bred out. So if anybody says this is a sativa, they're probably because we've crossbred this plant for hundreds and hundreds of years to breed in THC because that was the cash crop,
right,
and breed out all these other things. So now we're starting to mess around and say, well, THCV is an appetite suppressant. Can we breed plants with THCV or CBD? We never even had. CBD was part of the, hemp. Well, hemp doesn't express naturally that much CBD. So what do? We grow fields of it and we dry it as an industrial combine and we extract it and all the that's part of this, instead of just the flower part of it, you're getting leaves, stems, everything in it, and you're creating cannabidiol because that's the next thing. Now it's Delta 8. So the business is making this work. But let me just explain indicas and sativas. So originally, the original indica dominant, or the indica crops, they grew in Southeast Asia. A few thousand years ago, sort of Nepal kind of area, Kashmir area, that's where the early indicas were found. So harsh climate, 4 seasons, snow. This plant grows wide. The leaves are wider. It doesn't grow to the sun. Doesn't stretch at all. And because the plant's, when it's stressed, it expresses what's called terpenes, which are the essential oils that the plant produces. Every single plant in nature produces essential oils. In cannabis, their terpenes work together with cannabinoids to create an effect. So what it did, we think that the natural predators that were in that area, it sort of mutated and it started expressing these terpenes to detract the natural predators in that area. And if you look at the original indicas and even the indicas hybrids, if you smell them, they smell diesely and skunky. They have this skunky kind of smell.
Right.
So that is isolated that has to do with myrcene, which is the dominant terpene essential oil that's dominant in the indica plants. And that is a sedative that makes you combine with THC, that gives you the down sedative kind of feeling.
Right. And then the indica.
That's the indica. So the sativas.
Right.
So the
That's right,
sativas,
yes.
the sativas, they originated in more Caribbean type of climates, warmer climates like South Africa with the Durbans, and like Hawaii with the Mauis and all these other things, and in Mexico, Acapulco, gold and all that stuff. So the plant stretches to the sun. It looks different. The leaves are thinner, and under stress, whatever natural predators were of that area, the plant smells fruitier. It's given off a fruitier, citrusy type of smell to it, and that one is dominant in a terpene called limonene, which is then shown in studies to boost dopamine, and that gives you the lift up. So those are the sativas, and those are the indicas. And then together with the terpenes and the flavonoids and the other components, the other cannabinoids, you can start working on having a specific effect. Now, the challenge is that we haven't done enough studies on individual components and how they work together. Our focus has been THC and now CBD, and now we're starting to look at other components. But because there's so many different components of the plant, it makes it very difficult to take all those components, the DNA of the plant, to match with your own genetics and come up with a formulation. So we're creating that guideline now, but we urge people to do more studies. We do studies too, but we urge people to do more studies so we can start looking at this, what's called the entourage effect, but I like to call it a concert because I'm a music guy. It's a concert of all these things playing together and how they interact within your body.
It's so fascinating because, historically speaking, the growers who were, before everything was legalized, they were very sophisticated in their understanding of growing a plant and how to use the plant and also the different types and its impact and effect. So they were doing it more through observation and experience and exposure to the product and how it was produced. Now we've moved into kind of a more commercialized, specialized industry. What do you think are some of the positives of that, and then some of the negatives? Because I know there was a massive investment push.
Yeah.
And MedMen's just around the street, and there was a whole bunch of controversy around that. And then there's the individual growers and dispensary. What is this whole industry? What's happening in the industry, and what do you see happening in the future?
I think it's going to splinter into three different factions. So John Boehner, who was the Speaker of the House, who was one of the biggest opponents of cannabis, who would stand up there and say, "This is the devil's lettuce," and how dare you consume that, and he joined Acreage, which is one of the top multi-state operators in North America. And then he had an awakening. He had a green awakening. Which green is it? Is it the money or who knows?
Yeah, green awakening.
He had one of those that happened. So I think, look, big ag is going to get really into cannabis, and they are already. Yes. So you're going to have genetically aligned breeding methods. Everything that Monsanto does, you're going to have in the cannabis crops as well. CBD, all the different crops are going to be big ag. Then you're going to have big pharma. Big pharma is going to isolate individual components, try to get patents on them, and do clinical trials on individual components. I'll give you an example. So I was contacted by a research study in New York that was looking at autism, and they're trying to isolate CBDV, which is another cannabinoid. And they asked me if I could help them get CBDV. So it's very difficult to isolate. I talked to my growers who I'm friendly with, who grow CGMP, who follow CGMP standards and all that for extraction. Can you extract CBDV? Yes. And I went back to them and they said, we can't use it. I'm like, why? It's Department of Defense that's sponsoring the study, and they have an exclusive contract with GW Pharmaceuticals to get their CBDV from them. Now it's Jazz because they bought GW Pharmaceuticals. So we'll have big pharma involved in that. There's nothing we can do about that part. And then we'll have, I think, the nutraceutical industry. So we'll have specific formulations that are indication specific. So this is to help you unwind or to help you with focus. And they'll have multiple components, and we'll have consistency. So the same way you would go to your vitamin shop or GNC, you pick up your formulation, you turn around, I don't have to worry about going and seeing the test results. Now it's Wild West. You don't know what you're getting. You get a product that says, 28% THC. What else is in there? I have no idea. Well, it doesn't have heavy metals. Great. What about the terpene profile? Does it matter? Of course it matters. So that's kind of what I feel is going to be the future. And what I'm hoping is going to be the future is more personalized formulations. So I can go in and say Wade or Len, I can go anywhere in the world and I can say, I'd like to get my formulation number 1, whatever it's going to be called.
Right.
And I can get it anywhere.
So standardized formulations that have been established, that are
Absolutely.
dispensed in an appropriate facility so that you know that what you're buying is exactly what it is.
Absolutely.
But
It could be like a compounding, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it could be like a compounding pharmacy kind of way to start creating them too. So
Right, or have it shipped right to your house even.
shipped right to your house. Yeah.
Which leads to, I think, your company right here. Let's talk about what you're doing and really leading the way with Endocanna Health.
Yeah. So we created this endoDNA test. So the goal is to be able to get better control of your health and wellness. So one of the things that really illuminated, besides all the things I talked about, I'll give you an example of how this can work, but especially during COVID, one of the things we started seeing is that the healthcare system has failed us in a certain way.
Yes.
So what we want to do is empower individuals to take better control of their own health and wellness. Preventative. So now, it's not like this hurts over here, I can take a shot for it, I can get a pill for this. It's more or less, why does this hurt and what's causing that? So what can I do to find out my genetic blueprint? Then I can take something that's more aligned to me, that's personalized, and then a feedback loop mechanism that I can see what the epigenetics of that
Right.
are. So that's really the goal.
It's exactly what we do in biological optimization around nutrients and vitamins and hormones and all these sort of different optimizations. But you're using specifically testing and working within the endocannabinoid system
Correct.
to isolate and find out which is going to be your magic symphony.
Yeah, there's a few different things we do. So it's very easy to use. It's a buccal swab. You swab the inside of your cheek. You put it back in the box. You register because we're HIPAA compliant, and we have to make sure. And I stress this over and over that if you do not register, we will not know that DNA belongs to you.
Right.
It's very, very important. We are a data company, but we don't care about your personal data. We care about that there's 1,000 people with your genotype that took this formulation, fed back, that it's working, and our AI can make better suggestions for people. So it's really, really important. So there's over 160 different reports on different conditions like anxiety, mood, pain. Then we have predispositions to like opioids or stimulants that pain management specialists can use this to guide people taking cannabis instead of an opioid. We have nutrient deficiencies, vitamins, something that you mentioned as well. THC side effects. So some people have some challenges with side effects, and I'll explain those. Metabolic function, so dosing based on metabolic function, what type of metabolites you are. And then we have drug-to-drug interaction. So if you're taking prescription medication, which most people don't talk about, certain cannabinoids can inhibit the efficacy of your prescription medication as well. So this is what the report does. So when you swab, you log in, you get your results, and it'll say all those things. But in addition, we give you your personalized wellness plan that shows you all your predispositions and your suggested formulations. So this is better for you. And then we geofence and look at products based on a certificate of analysis or test results and show you which is the product closest to you that matches your suggested ratio and where you can get that product. So from the beginning all the way to a personalized product.
Wow, that's super cool. So the company that you run, can you share with people what it is?
It's called Endocanna Health.
Yeah.
Our website is endodna.com. That's the product. And not only can you use the test to get your results, but you can also take your 23andMe and your Ancestry, any other DNA test. You can upload your raw data that you own, and you'll get a report instantaneously on your endocannabinoid system.
And who are some of the people that are using EndoDNA? And because I think of so many different applications that you could leverage this for. Is it the end users, or are we also starting to see it be something that's being integrated into medicine?
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com.
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of different examples. From a demographic standpoint, the person who uses our test the most is the Whole Foods shopper, the mom in Whole Foods who's making buying decisions for their family. The second is a person who has a condition. So they're looking to alleviate some sort of condition, whether it's a chronic condition of pain or they can't sleep or something else. People that have adverse effects before, like they smoked and said, oh no, I get anxiety, let me find something that works for me. Or they're kind of curious. Somebody is scared and like, I want to try it, but I want to see that I can not have an adverse effect. So, but I'll give you some example. So I use Grandma Mary because people can relate to Grandma.
Right.
So Grandma was, she ate a brownie 60 years ago at a party and flipped out, had a stressful event, let's call it.
Right.
She was super high and she was all like...
They had an uncle that ate a whole box of brownies one time, was stoned for 3 days.
Exactly.
I heard that story like as secondary information from my parents.
Well, I'll tell you, man, THC, your liver converts THC to 11-oxyhydroxide, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. It's 5 to 50 times more powerful than THC. So if people are doing edibles, they're in for a completely different experience. However,
some people really do well in edibles, and some people don't. I got a friend that's just, he's totally dialed in on edibles.
Well, I'll explain why.
Oh, okay, great.
It's exactly what I'm getting to. So Grandma, 60 years later, she's in an assisted living facility. It's a real story. And she's watching Sanjay Gupta on CNN. He's talking about cannabis, and she's diagnosed with cancer. So the doctor recommended she should try cannabis, and I think she was going through chemo and all that stuff. So she's like, well, if Sanjay Gupta says it's good,
why not, right?
Sanjay
Trust
Gupta,
him, right?
Come on. So she went to a dispensary, and the bud tender there recommended a chocolate for her, an edible. I said, Grandma, don't take too much, take a little. And she's like, how much? I don't know. Take a piece. So she went and took that, and she had an awful experience. Not only was she stressed, but also she was hallucinating. It almost turned into psychosis. And she went around and started telling people, don't consume this, it's not good, they're full of shit, it's all that other stuff. So when she took the DNA test, there's a couple of things that she noticed. Number one, she saw that she was a poor metabolizer of THC through her digestive system. So don't take an edible. Number two, she was prone to stress, and I'll explain how that works with this gene called Fa that actually breaks down anandamide. So the more Fa you have, the less anandamide you have. And I'll explain kind of how that works. So when she realized that, she would take a much more balanced formulation, so more of a 1-to-1. Her terpene profile was completely different. So linalool was her dominant terpene, and it's found in lavender too. And what it does, it suppresses the anxiety that's provoked by THC, if it's linalool dominant. And then she started taking it as a tincture or sublingual underneath her tongue so she could bypass her liver. And now, she was getting chemo, and she was giving out our business card to all the people there. She's like, hey, you should check these guys out if you want to take cannabis. So that's a perfect example of how somebody would use it. We had another woman who was 78 years old, and this is not just for the elderly. I'm just using this as an example. And the reason why I found this fascinating, because I never heard this before in terms of edibles. So her doctor recommended cannabis. She went to a dispensary. Again, the bud tender recommended gummies. So she ate one gummy. I think each one was 10 milligrams. She ate another gummy, nothing. She ended up eating, I think, like 10 gummies, felt nothing.
Wow.
And we were like, what?
How's that possible, right?
So we have a drug interaction report. So when she went and uploaded her
It's
prescription,
the Joey Diaz factor, right?
It's a Joey Diaz factor, exactly. She uploaded her that. She had a medication that she was taking that was an inducer. She had to take 400 times the amount of THC to the average person to feel it because of the drug that she was on.
Wow.
So grandma does not need to eat a bag full of gummies, you know. So those are some of the things that we show people that you can take. And I was talking about FA. This is really interesting because somewhere around 42% of the population has this genetic predisposition. And that's why a lot of people, I feel, have this anxiety that's provoked by THC, because it turns on their genetic expression of this FA predisposition. So FA, F-A-A-H, it produces an enzyme that breaks down anandamide, which remember is the bliss hormone, right? So if that's the case, what happens is people are much more prone to stress. So what happens in stress, you know this, and you can probably chime in if I'm wrong about this in certain ways. So if somebody gets cut off in traffic, you have all these things that are
Stress response.
Stress response, fight or flight. You have adrenaline, you have norepinephrine, you have cortisol that's pumped into your bloodstream, and then you realize there's no lion chasing your jungle, so your endocannabinoid system starts to release anandamide to be able to get you back to balance, among other things within your body. Now, if you have too much FA, it's like Pac-Man eating anandamide. If you have too much FA, which is homozygous, if anybody wants to be a science, it's the homozygous allele combination on the FA SNP. So if that happens, you are actually producing less anandamide than the average population. And over time, you're expressing more cortisol that hangs around. And if that's the case, it actually elevates your pH level, makes you more acidic. And if that's the case, your immune system really doesn't like that, so it starts attacking that. So you have these inflammation, especially in your joints and your ankles and your knees and all that stuff. So people walk around inflamed because they're acidic, and plus the food they eat and everything else that you talk about as well. So if that's the case, you can actually subsidize that with THC. So understanding you're getting enough THC so you can subsidize what you're lacking in your natural anandamide. But if you take too much THC, it actually does the opposite. It triggers that expression of your stress genes, stress reactivity, and you can have those panic attacks and paranoia that people with cannabis can consume.
So with this testing, are you not only able to see which cannabinoid families or derivatives or what's going to be best for you, but also you can kind of maybe dial in your ratios or how that sort of thing, so that you get the optimal experience that you're looking for? Is that accurate?
It's exactly. So it gives you your ideal formulation of cannabinoids and terpenes. It tells you how much to consume based on metabolic function, and then where to get the exact products that match your genetic predisposition.
Oh, so it actually should, with the dispensaries that would have that, so they're registered on a...
Yeah, well, the way we work is we work with manufacturers. So it depends on the state or country because we're international.
Okay.
So whoever provides us certificates of analysis, we run through another patent algorithm. We run through that and we show you these products are 70, 50, 80% match. Then you go onto their website, you put in your zip code, and I'll show you the dispensaries that are closest to you, geofence, where you can find those products.
So eventually this will probably all be contained on blockchain transactions, so that you'll know where the whole flow of everything, so that everything has been guaranteed, certified, perfect, and in alignment, and then sent to your house or at your local dispensary.
And I'll tell you, when things go super legal and they end ridiculous prohibition, Amazon drones can be delivering your personalized formulations right to your house that same day.
So I can be just sitting up on the balcony, and the drones will be flying in joints to everybody, their own customized joint to each person.
This is Waze, this is Slen's joint. Enjoy.
Like there's only some guy that was smoking some long time ago that already saw that vision, probably, right?
I think I was. Years ago, like, wouldn't it be cool if a drone just dropped this off? And like,
yes, I know.
Can I light that for you too?
And they can send a bag of chips too. I would like to come into some specifics too about, you mentioned, which I thought was curious because we're in the health and wellness industry.
Yeah.
For me, THC it's impossible to stay on a diet.
Yeah.
And I have friends who will use THC and then they don't eat.
Yeah.
So what would be the genetic variance between, like, what would be happening there if you have any idea?
Yeah, it's not really genetics as much, which it does play somewhat of a role. It's more about stimulating an area of your brain that stimulating of your that's a pleasure part of your brain. And what it does is when you're stimulated that with THC, you begin to crave things that are pleasurable. So you crave salt, you crave sugar, and you crave fat. Nobody smokes a joint and says, "Can I get some kale?" That's like, oh man, I want that kale right now. No,
Right.
But sometimes.
So why is that?
Because it releases a certain chemical that actually stimulates a part of your brain that makes you want to have the pleasure chemicals that are in your brain that release and makes you want to have some of those things right now. We've shown that certain cannabinoids actually work against their appetite suppressant, like THCV.
Yeah, that's what
Right.
you mentioned, and I thought that was interesting.
Right. So if your strain or chemovar or cultivar is high in THCV, perhaps that is suppressing that part of the brain, the stimulation of wanting to have some of those the munchies.
Is there would there be a variance as well with the individual? I guess because some people that's not going to activate that part of their brain.
Yeah, some people get more activation, some people get less activation. But we're still gathering the information and the feedback to see what genetic is. My belief is not just one gene; it's a combination of different genotypes. So we're trying to see, like through AI, to see which combinations work best. And we're doing that in studies too. Like when we're doing clinical studies, and we have 2 clinical trials, and we have a few observational studies that are going on now. We have one that we just finished with publishing on something called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which is something that people report having vomiting and nausea from consuming cannabis. Heavy users, after a while, it triggers that. So what we found is in our study, there's a percentage of our cohort that has a combination of genes that are prevalent in like 60 to 70% of our population, and that combination is only prevalent in 0.2 of the general population. So we're finding genetic variants that work together to produce an effect that is different in certain people than other people, and that's kind of the research we're working on now.
I love the level of sophistication and detail and aspects of this, and I find it's fascinating about the cannabis plant or hemp or whatever you want to call it. It was the largest, most commercially successful plant in history.
Right.
An aspect of the foundational part. And then I think it was the cotton industry, which kind of created this whole kind of negative campaign, and it kind of just got pushed. Everybody used to grow cannabis on their farms, hundreds of years ago. And then all of a sudden, and what's interesting, it wasn't one of the plants that went through the commercialization of agriculture that happened in the last 80 years.
Yeah.
It's starting to get hyper commercialized.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And we know what's happened with the plants. What are your concerns as someone intimately connected with this about the commercialization? Because I've heard there's challenges sometimes with the big grow ops, with actually producing quality plants, and then there's like the local. I would say the people who are really it's almost like there's the big agriculture kind of mindset of yield and percentages and stuff. And then there's like the organic guy at the farmer's market that's got the stuff that he's been passed on. He's a 3rd generation grower and they've cultivated it and know everything about it. So,
yeah, I mean, and I'll go back to your history of why it's illegal in a second too, if you're interested.
yeah, please do.
But I feel, and I hate to sort of make the analogy to the alcohol industry, but it's sort of like the Anheuser-Busch versus the craft brewery. So you're going to have massive ag, and they produce all kinds of, especially with CBD now. I mean, every single product you can possibly imagine, they just put CBD in it. So you need biomass, tons of it, because hemp doesn't express as much cannabidiol. It just doesn't. That wasn't the intent of the plant. But somebody said, wait, well, if you grow something that's 0.3% THC or less, it's legal. Part of how they came up with that number, I mean, there's no science behind it. There's no reason. They just said,
oh, 0.03.
yeah, I'm like, why put, and in Europe, it's 0.2. So I don't even know.
It's kind of like impaired driving levels or something.
Yeah, it's like, for me, because we're all different, like, it doesn't make any sense. So, you have craft brewers that are going to take care and they're going to make different types of plants. Hopefully they'll both survive. Who knows? But, with prohibition hopefully going away, I think we'll have both. And I think there'll be a room for both those cultivators who are creating these amazing crosses. And now tissue culture sample is a big thing. So they're talking about consistency. You can't get consistency if you're grown. And the reason why is the further you're away from the seed, the more genetic drift that you have. So
Right.
more that you clone,
Right.
you have exposure of this plant to different viruses and everything else.
Can you explain cloning to people so they understand that?
Yeah, so you have a mother who is a female plant who doesn't produce seeds. You actually take clippings of that and you plant it and make little babies. And from there, you can keep cutting the mom and creating these little babies into mature plants until the mom gets tired. Then you take your favorite clone strain or cultivar that's also female because the females are producing the flowers, and you make that your next mom. So that's kind of cloning, if I explain it in an easy way.
I love it.
It's better than it's much
Because naturally there's a male plant and a female plant, right?
Yeah.
And the male plant's usually where most of the hemp proteins and stuff go.
Well, also the male plant produces the seeds. So you're inseminating you're inseminating the female to produce the flower without the seed. So back in the day, we used to not understand. So some of our flower had seed in it, and we had some hermaphrodites and all these other things. But now we dialed it in that we're only producing females that flower without seed. So we can do that insemination in different ways. And then in order to produce, so you would have to pop a seed and you have to grow from a seed a plant that can take months to grow. You may have 1 or 2 crops a year. But now with cloning, you can have 6-week cycles, 8-week cycles, depending on the strain, 9-week cycles that you can keep turning over your crop and keep creating yield. And that's a way to accelerate the cultivation of these strains. And with tissue culture, what you do is you take the tissue in a petri dish, you clone that, and you create specific clones right from the tissue. So you can make an exact replica and copy of that strain that may have been the high yield that you wanted, or maybe the most potent one, or maybe the most robust with the cannabinoids you're looking for. So you'll be able to grow and dial in your cultivation through genetic editing.
It's truly incredible because really what we're talking about, what's happening and it's interesting compared to other plants, other types of crops out there. It seems that the acceleration through this, considering how short it's even been legal in some states, and it's expanding and probably have national legalization, I think within the next, well, certainly, I would say probably in this election cycle.
Yeah.
Why do you think this plant per se has gotten so much traction, so much attention, and so much influence? It's literally passing other types of plants.
Yeah.
And its vast array and exploration.
I mean, they say stoners it dumbs you down. And I mean, I've met the absolute most brilliant people in the world that are in the cannabis industry. It's fascinating.
I mean, Elon Musk is smoking on Joe Rogan. Both those guys are pretty smart.
we should let him hear, right?
Yeah.
It's just an amazing, so it's polarizing, it's interesting. For scientists, even scientists that don't consume, they find it fascinating because it's so many different components, and it's like the new frontier. You have this plant that produces so many different things. What can you do to isolate them? What can you do to make 3 together or 100? It's really exciting for the scientific community. For the business community, I mean, you have a great business opportunity, a multi-billion-dollar opportunity that's next frontier in the green rush or whatever you want to call it. And then you have people who've been in it for a long time, like me, that pinch myself every day. And I'm like, I'm so lucky. I cannot believe I'm in this industry. I have friends of mine who are locked up. I've been,
Right.
there's all kinds of things. And then you have people who are really passionate about it that are coming to the forefront now. So it's a culmination of many different things. I think what's happening is with big business, you're having people come in, the suits are coming in and are trying to take over, and it's inevitable. It's going to happen. Anything like this happens, there's going to be consolidation. And this is the challenge is because it's federally illegal, you don't have the same law. You don't have monopoly laws. You don't have all those things. So at some point we can blink and have 3 companies that own everything. It can easily happen with a consolidation because we're not really policing any of that stuff. So I think that quality will probably be lost. If you look at all the big multi-state operators, not all of them, but a lot of them don't have the same standard of quality as you craft, a cultivator, somebody who's been cultivating for 3
Right.
generations. So you have a lot of those issues, and we always knew, and we, the activist part of me, we always knew the reason why this was, illegal or prohibited. It has nothing to do with the plant itself. It had to do with racism. It had to do with there's political reasons. There's all kinds. You mentioned cotton. Well, if you look at before the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act was passed, jazz was a big part of the life in the U.S. So you had black and white all dancing together and hanging out together, and you had farmers from Mexico that would bring over marijuana. That's why it was called marijuana, and conservative whites really didn't like their white daughter hanging out with their black jazz musician, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So they started pushing back. And William Randolph Hearst, through Harry Anslinger, figured out a way what they can do. So DuPont and Hearst, they partnered together to start making fabrics, synthetic fabrics with DuPont. You mentioned cotton, but also synthetic fabrics, mm-hmm. and also paper. So Hearst had an empire of newspapers, magazines, and all that other stuff, so they can print on wood, paper made out of wood, no longer hemp because everything was hemp prior to that, and fabrics, so they can push everybody out. And one of the ways they started doing that, before Anslinger started really locking people up for cultivation, was that they started incentivizing farmers to change their crop from hemp to corn, and started financially incentivizing. So farmers and then when the Tax Act passed, it was extremely expensive for them to grow hemp.
Right.
But they were given a financial incentive to grow corn. So we became the #1 exporter of corn around the world.
So instead of having corn chips, we would have had hemp chips had that not happened.
Corn oil, corn syrup is in everything right now.
Right. Yeah. High fructose corn syrup,
exactly.
As opposed to hemp, which is now proliferating in the holistic health industry.
Exactly.
And for me, as a plant-based guy coming out of British Columbia, we were one of the first companies in the world to start selling hemp protein back in the day, 15 years ago, online. Yeah. So, and of course, hemp oil is an extremely powerful essential fatty acid oil complex, and then now we're seeing all the derivatives of hemp and fiber and clothing, and it's such a versatile plant. Yeah. I want to swing right back to who this is for, why they should get it, and what's the process to do that working with your company.
So this is for anybody that is interested in consuming cannabis or making cannabis part of their life, and looking at their own endocannabinoid system and seeing where they have some deficiencies and where they don't. So they can start looking at modulating their endocannabinoid system. So that's who it's for. The process is really, really simple. I mean, I can open the kit.
Yeah, sure. Let's see how it works.
Yeah. So you can go to endodna.com. You can go and purchase this online. It'll be delivered right to your home. And when you open it up, the first thing you will see is a license key over here. So license key, and it's in a couple different places. License key is really, really important because the first thing you would do is register this. We are HIPAA compliant. All the data is fully encrypted and anonymized, so it's de-identified. We're built on, if anybody is a tech geek, we're built on Amazon's AWS platform, and we're HIPAA under Amazon's AWS, which is like a 61-page document. Right. So your personal information is in one place, unlike other companies that sell their data, we are a data company that is interested in result-driven data, but not your personal information.
Right.
Okay. So you register, then you would take out there's like instructions in here and our privacy policy, which is on the back here. It's also on our website. There's a little box over here for your tube, and it comes with this tube and swab. So what you would do is you would take this out.
Yep.
You would swab the inside of your cheek using this.
Yep.
You would flip this around, put it back in the reagent, which is this little purple liquid that keeps it suspended. Then you would put everything into this bio bag, so it doesn't leak, just in case. And you put this in the bag, put the label on this, that's already pre-addressed stamped, and mail it directly to the lab.
Now, do you need to get one of these kits? Because I can see the value of having this and being able to get specific on everything. Do you order online? Do you have to have a medical doctor?
So you go to endodna.com and you can just order and ship directly to your home. You can get it. We have many medical professionals, physicians that sell these out of their clinics everywhere, all over the world. You can go to retail locations like Erewhon, for instance, in Los Angeles to buy them, but you can get it directly online at endodna.com. And also, if you, like I mentioned before, if you have a 23andMe or Ancestry or anything like that, you go to EndoDNA, you don't have to swab. You can just upload your data that you already own, and you get an instantaneous report.
You mean, so if you're already if you've already done your DNA, you can just send that information in without swabbing?
Yes, correct.
So we don't. So all we do is register.
You register, and you go in the shopping cart, you say raw data upload, and you take the data that's on your 23andMe, for instance, you upload it and you get a report. Now, the caveat to that is it's only as good as the version of the 23andMe it's used. We're looking at 700,000 SNPs right now. So some of them are not covered in different versions of 23andMe and Ancestry.
So you're better off to do the direct one.
The direct one will get you, so it all depends. Instantaneous gratification versus I like to wait for 3 weeks until I get my results, or I want them now. Even though they may not be as comprehensive, but I want them now. So it depends what you want to do. And this is $199 for the full kit, retail, and it's $49.95 for the raw data upload.
That's great. And in regards to that, so now, as you said, we're in the middle of the discovery of a lot of things. As someone who's, let's say, put their information in here, are you going to get updates or new information that's going to come forward? How does that work?
Yeah, so lifetime updates. So every single time there's a new study, you get a notification, something new came up. We even had contradictory studies. So one of the things we decided was we have to have a peer-reviewed reference for everything that we say. By the way, I'd like to offer, if you want to do this, one of the things we can do is I can come back or whatever, I can go over your results with you in real time.
Oh, that'd be super cool.
And then we'll talk to your audience and see if if it makes sense or it doesn't.
Yeah, that'd be so fun. I think that's a definite go. It'd be really fun to do that.
I think it'd be
kind
really
of share
cool
that
too.
with people because it's really cool.
But yeah, so I definitely believe that in looking at your endocannabinoid system, what it does, it empowers you to understand a little bit more about yourself and how you would take different cannabinoids and terpenes as a supplement. What can I do to subsidize different things within my body and avoid those sharp corners that may make me feel a little bit off? To having, like, I'll give you another example. I don't want to scare anybody because cannabis is an extremely, extremely safe.
Far
substance.
safer than alcohol or many of the prescription medication that people are dealing with today.
Exactly, but there's still adverse effects. So I had a reporter that interviewed me, I don't know, 6 months ago. I kind of forgot about it. It was for some article, and I forgot about it. I'm like, I don't know, I get interviewed, not that I'm a big shot, but I forget because I'm focused on operating your business. So a couple months go by, 3 months, whatever go by, and I get an email. It says, hey, Len, I'm sorry, I didn't publish the article. I intend to do this next week. I had a psychotic episode. I'm like, oh. She goes, you forewarned me about it because I went over her DNA results and I showed her where she has predisposition to psychosis. There's a gene called AKT1, for instance, that's associated with psychosis. I went over it. She has a medical condition that she takes cannabis for. She did not listen. She just continued to do what she did. She's like, I'm fine. I've been smoking for whatever, 15 years, never had an issue. All of a sudden, she consumed a concentrate. I think she was vaping or something like that. And she had a psychotic episode. She had to go get hospitalized for a psychotic episode. And she was so upset, not only because she had the episode, but she was so upset that she couldn't consume cannabis anymore because this is her medicine. And I went over her result. I called her and I said, would you want me to go over this again? Let's go over your suggestions. What does it say? And it was a completely different formulation. It was very high in CBD, very low in THC, completely different terpene profile, all these different things. She had like a perfect storm of predispositions. And she called me up and she gave us a testimonial. So she called me up and she said, oh my God, I am so grateful because I can be me again.
Right.
And that was it. And that's why. And that's the purpose. That's why we do what we do. I mean, that's my favorite thing to hear is like this work. It's not about somebody who's like, a stoner many years. I don't think he'll mind if I mention his name. I did Tommy Chong, for instance, who everybody knows, like in his 80s, who smoked all his life. He's, and he was so surprised and he confided in me. He's like, oh my God, this is correct. I actually had this. I'm like, I never knew. Like, yeah, well, they won't show you in a movie, right? But he had some of these predispositions that were triggered by certain things. So he even learned something.
Well, when you're teaching Tommy Chong about cannabinoids, you're on the right track.
Right?
Len, thank you for being here. Can you share with people where they could reach you, Facebook, social media, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I'm Len May, Lenmay. Len May DNA is Instagram, and Len May on Facebook, and Twitter, Len May DNA, and everywhere else, Len May, Lenmay.
Well, that's exciting. I'm going to do this test and get all the information and get you back for real soon.
Cool, man.
Take care, man.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion. And a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.